Mini in name but big on style. This is the new MINI Countryman S. Petrol. Now at 270,000 ringgit, the new Countryman S, built here in Malaysia, is 90,000 ringgit more affordable than the CBU model that preceded it. However, in terms of specification, nothing has changed, and that includes what's going on under the bonnet, because there is a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine producing some 200 horsepower and about 300 Newton meters of torque. That power is then paired to a 7-speed wet dual-clutch automatic gearbox, which then sends power to all 4 wheels via the MINI All-4 system. As a result, the Century Sprint is dealt with in just 7.4 seconds, which makes it decently fast, despite it being decently large. Now, of course, you can also get the Countryman as an all-electric model, but in terms of exterior specification, you can barely tell the difference. Because up front, you still get the same MINI treatment for this face, which is incredibly distinctive, replete with these multi-faceted full LED headlights, replete with automatic high beam, and the LED indicators live in here. The only way to tell them apart is, obviously, on this petrol-powered car, you have an actual grille, and the S badge is done in red, whereas if you were to get the Countryman SE, this is done in sort of a lime green. Now, talking about the front end design, of course, you get this vibrant silver, according to them, but as far as I can tell, it looks like gold. And of course, that gives it that MINI grille outline, which is ever so distinctive. And of course, that color is also repeated on the MINI badge, as well as the underbreather down there to make it look like a little bit like a skid plate. Now, one of the things that you may notice from here is this panel right here, because this hides the radar, which is disabled as standard, because in order to use most of the functionality that comes with the radar, you have to pay either 202 ringgit a month or 4,000-ish at point of purchase, because it's a MINI. At least the 360 cam is standard, which is great because visibility from the inside is a little bit impacted. Now at 270,000 ringgit, including the full 5-year warranty and service pack, the MINI Countryman competes with vehicles like the Volvo XC40 as well as the Mercedes-Benz GLA and GLB more than anything else, as well as the equivalent EQ models. And so it is important that this car is decently large, which it is. Now in terms of rolling stock, there are a set of 20-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Continental EcoContact 6Q tyres. In fact, these are not just any EcoContact 6Q tyres, these are made specially for the MINI, and as a result there's a little star there to denote them as being specially made and developed for this car. Now, talking about the wheels themselves, these are not aerodynamically designed, although they may look like it, and they're also called windmill alloys. But I love the fact that this is, again, that same vibrant silver or gold that you see repeated in other elements of the car, such as that little bit of trim down there, as well as, again, the badging on either end. The only other place on the side of the car where that color is visible is up here on this little panel here, because even the All-4 badge is done in black. But I think that it helps to tie all of that in quite nicely. I think it does make it a very cohesive design. Now, because this is the MINI Countryman, naturally you get body cladding all the way around. You also get a dual tone roof and functional roof rails, which is great because this car doesn't come with any sort of sunroof, although you do get flush door handles that we've seen from other BMW and MINI models. And mercifully, even though this is a MINI and they have a history of cutting corners, you at least have touch sensitive sensors on both front doors, which means that you don't even need to take the key out of your pocket if you need to unlock the door from this side of the car, although the MINI does come as standard with approach, unlock and departure lock, which means that as you walk up to the car, it'll unlock, and as you walk away, it'll lock, all automatically, which means this car is very convenient. And I do quite like the side profile of the MINI Countryman because I think that it does still retain the essence of MINI design while still looking like very much an SUV. Now, the MINI Countryman is now no longer the only SUV in the lineup, because the Countryman is also complemented by the MINI AIMAN, which in terms of size actually sits between the Cooper 3-door and the Countryman 5-door, which means that the Countryman as a result has grown quite a bit, and that is most evident at the rear, because this rear design is now a little bit more bulbous than what we've seen before, although it is bookmarked on either end rather by these full LED taillights, replete with your LED indicators in here, as well as customizable LED light signatures. You can choose from 3 selectable within the car, which also manipulate the light signature for the headlights, which I think look quite cute. And once again, you have the red S badging here, but the MINI and Countryman badging are all done again in that vibrant silver, which once again, still looks like gold to me, which is also repeated down here on this lower bash plate. Now, behind this powered tailgate, you will find, if I can find the button, significantly more space than you got from the previous generation Countryman. And of course, because this is the petrol-powered model and not the electric one, there's also a significantly larger amount of space underneath the boot floor. In fact, you can probably fit a couple of very decently large backpacks down there without actually impacting the main cargo area up here. And of course, if you need even more space, the rear seats fold flat 40-20-40 for added practicality. There are small hooks, there are lights. This is quite a practical space. The only thing in here that I'm not a big fan of is this parcel shelf, because this sort of fixed shelf like this doesn't feel particularly high quality, and more importantly, if you have something underneath the boot floor, there is no space to hide it. In fact, I'm pretty sure this doesn't actually fit. However, talking about the parcel shelf, I do appreciate the fact that they have bothered to try and put in the Union Jack sort of design thing going on here, which means that if you're in the driver's seat and you pop open the boot, it looks like there's a little black English flag. Now, the inside of the Mini Countryman feels very much like a Mini, because if you've seen our reviews of the AIMAN and the Cooper before this, you will understand that this dashboard architecture looks very similar to what we've seen in the past. So up front, there is a 9.6-inch OLED screen, the first circular application of an OLED screen in a car, and it looks fantastic, it's very responsive, and the UX looks very good, but its functionality is not so good, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. I no longer have an instrument cluster because all my information comes up here, which includes things like my power, my speed, as well as my fuel gauge, all live up here, which is a bit strange because again I have to move my gaze from here to make sure that I don't hit one of those new average speed cameras. However, there is now a heads-up display, which is a standard, it's a standard fit feature in Malaysia, although it is an option in foreign markets, so at least some things are displayed here, although my indicator lights are still up here. Now, beyond that, there have been a severe reduction of buttons in this cabin. All have been minimized into just this space here, which has your volume knob, your experience selector, which is mini speak for drive modes. You have your engine start-stop key, which allows you to twist it to switch it on and off, which I think is quite cool, as well as your gear selector toggle here. This I haven't really gotten on with very well. It was kind of cute in the Cooper, but now it's starting to get a little bit irritating because every time I need to make a maneuver, especially in a three-point turn, I keep looking either here or here. And this is not so intuitive. Now, beyond those, you also get a button to control your drivetrain settings, as well as a button to trigger your 360 cam and your parking assistant, which this car comes with as standard, as well as your defogger and your emergency hazards. You get a couple of cup holders down here, a nice sort of rubberized mat here. You get a wireless phone charger here, a closable center storage box here, which is quite nice, and more rubberized space back here. I mention all of this because this has no space whatsoever. Instead, it just sort of moves in and out as an armrest and does nothing else. You've got a decently sized glove box, although it's deeper than it is sort of wide, so you have to pay attention to that. The door bins are large enough for a litre sized bottle. There are a decent amount of storage spaces in here, so that's all relatively all right. I appreciate the fact that some of the controls in this car have been made digital, but a lot of them still remain quite analog, and so you still have a good set of buttons on this multifunction steering wheel. You still get buttons here to control your mirrors as well as your windows, which is always nice to see, and so it feels like a nice balance between digital and analog. Same goes for the air conditioning vents, which are nicely analog, but they also feel a little bit Anyway, now talking about this screen, while it certainly looks very nice in terms of the user interface, the user interaction and experience is not so great. Because while the graphics are all very nice, so as you swipe through these things, lots of little animated widgets come up, and of course it's got the world's cutest voice assistant dog thing called Spike, which I like a lot. The problem is when I'm trying to change anything of any real significance, it is set deep, at least 3 or 4 layers within some menu. So for example, if I want to figure out what this car's doing as fuel consumption is concerned, I have to go to the home screen, press the app button, scroll all the way down to find my journey data, and then find the number. And bear in mind, while I'm doing this, my wireless Apple CarPlay Android Auto is completely gone. So if I'm trying to do this while I'm driving, I've suddenly lost my turn-by-turn directions. And then of course, when I'm done with this, I want to go back to Android Auto. Mercifully, there is just one button, but if I just press back, it doesn't go back to it, it just goes back to the main menu. And of course, the fact that all of these widgets are exactly the same color and exactly the same size and have zero visual differentiation from anything else except for Android Auto and Apple CarPlay just means that it's not very intuitive to use, especially given the fact that this is actually set quite far away. So for example, sat here in my driving position, I actually have to stretch to reach the furthest edges of the screen, which is not great. This could have been negated very easily by, I don't know, like a multifunctional rotary knob here. I feel like I've seen one of those before. I hope that somebody from MINI will remind me if they know what those things are, because I'm pretty sure there used to be them in the previous generation cars. Now, before I talk about rear seat space, I would like to point out that both the front seats are electrically powered, replete with a massage function for the driver, which is always nice to see, although there is no ventilation, which I think is a bit of a weird trade-off, but there we are. Now, sat behind myself, about 170 centimeters, I have a pretty good amount of knee room and a pretty good amount of headroom, no doubt as a result of not having any sort of glass up here. And so light back here is pretty good. Now, one thing that I would like to point out is the fact that if you were to get the Countryman as an electric model, the floor in this car gets significantly higher, which means that you don't have a lot of depth, so your knees end up sort of like about here, which makes it significantly less comfortable. But because it's the petrol-powered model, the footwells in this car are nice and deep, which means that sat here I actually have pretty decent under-thigh support, and because the front seats are mounted quite high, I've got plenty of space to tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me, even if the driver was significantly taller than I am. However, there is a physical drive shaft here in the middle, which means there is a little bit of a hump, although generally the center seat is quite narrow anyway, which means that anyone that you put here should be relatively small, although they can negotiate with the two outer passengers for foot space. Now, the same way there were two USB-C ports in the front, there are also two USB-C ports back here. There are also a set of air conditioning vents, which is very, very low, which means that they do qualify as crotch coolers. However, there's something very strange about them. While you can adjust whether or not you want airflow, there doesn't appear to be any way for you to adjust the direction of the airflow. These appear to be fixed vents, and so I'm not sure how effective they are in cooling the rear half of the cabin, but there we are. There are no vents on the B pillar, which is unfortunate, and of course you still get that same sort of textured material all the way around the front, and it's continued into the rear where it's bleeded into the sort of brown color from that fade that began on the front doors, which I think is a nice bit of continuity. However, the material quality back here is not so great, because if I just remove my mic for a moment, you'll be able to hear that this in the center is scratchy, and then this is also scratchy, and this here is a little bit softer, but this goes back to being scratchy. Now, the problem with this is, again, this is a 270,000 ringgit car, which means that it's not exactly the most affordable thing in the world, and plenty of brands have already shown us that you can use a lot more soft touch material without outwardly increasing the price, and so this just feels like a little bit of a cop-out. Now, mercifully, what isn't a cop-out is the fact that they have actually offered a center armrest, which sits at a nice angle. There are also ISOFIX mounts on both outer seats as well as on the front seat, which means that you have a bit more flexibility, especially when you're trying to deal with one of those large, bulky, rear-facing child seats. However, aside from that, it does feel a little bit low rent in here, especially when you consider the fact that, for example, the largest piece of material in front of you directly in your line of sight is hard, scratchy plastic. Hey, anyway. The thing is, if you were to try and evaluate any MINI solely on the merits of the segment that it's in and the price it's competing at, none of them would ever make sense. Because the primary selling point of a MINI is in the way it drives. It's actually a little bit funny. I've just realized that in the last 10 years I've been doing this job, never in my capacity as what it is that I do here at Malaysian Motoring have I actually driven a petrol-powered MINI. So this is a whole new experience in my professional capacity, although in my personal capacity I have driven many MINIs. The 3-door, the Countryman, there was even that one with the weird roof thing, the Paceman, I think it was called, can't remember. But yeah, this is a interesting thing. But anyway, in terms of the powertrain, this is a petrol-powered MINI, which means that up front there is a turbocharged 4-cylinder paired to a 7-speed DCT going to all 4 wheels. We've covered this already. Now, the interesting thing about this is because obviously it's not the electric one, it doesn't accelerate with the same sort of ferocity that the electric one does. However, it does benefit from having a slightly rottier exhaust note, which it reminds you of every single time you start the car. It makes a very interesting sort of rumble when you start it, which I think is interesting given the fact that this is ultimately a premium compact crossover, but that just feels a bit more sporty, a bit younger. And so that's kind of nice, and I suppose it is in keeping with the sort of Mini appeal, I suppose. And of course, that does also mean that when you do put your foot down, it does make a relatively nice noise, at least as nice as a 4-cylinder can get. So for example, I've got a slightly open stretch here. If I put my foot down, it's a nice revvy little mill, and I think it is, again, in keeping with the personality that this car seems to offer. Now, even though this car is built off of a front-wheel drive platform, the Countryman S that we get in Malaysia is all-wheel drive. That's why it's called the Countryman S All-4. And so you do get a little bit more traction, you get a little bit more grip, and it does feel like, especially when you're threading it through corners, that this car has a little bit more mechanical sort of hook up with the road. And so that does make this car feel a little bit more engaging to drive, and it does give you a certain degree of confidence. And I start by talking about this car's driving experience because this is ultimately a Mini, and that is something that is very important for Mini customers. If you wanted just a regular luxury driving experience, you would have bought a Mercedes-Benz. Instead, you buy a Mini because it's got that Mini driving experience, and that's not just the way the car looks, but it's also in the way the car drives. And I'm happy to report that even though this is the Countryman, which is known as the lardy one, it still drives like a proper Mini. It's got very lithe handling. The accuracy of the steering wheel is incredible, and it's so very sensitive, which means that when you're driving it about in town, you're just trying to nip through corners or tuck into little gaps in traffic, this car reacts so very quickly. It feels so agile and light on its feet, which is impressive given the fact this is not a particularly small car. Now, that aside, the Countryman is also not a particularly affordable car. Mini has always billed itself as a premium car maker or a premium car brand, and so the Countryman has to also appeal in the same sort of ways that another premium brand would, or any other premium brand would. And that is a little bit more interesting to me because there is a very clear sort of misunderstanding in the way this car's been built, because I can tell that the chassis engineers, for example, the people in charge of the ride and handling, were very clear on the brief that this is a Mini and therefore it must drive like a Mini. Whereas the rest of the engineering team, however, didn't seem to quite understand the premium part of this, because, for example, in terms of refinement, this car is not that quiet. I suspect the fact that it's got such massive alloy wheels, that might have something to do with it. But as you can hear on coarse chip roads like this, I'm only doing about 60 kilometers an hour, and the amount of noise that gets into the cabin is quite significant. I suspect, like I said, the tires have a lot to do with this, especially given the fact they're not only very wide, but also quite thin. And so there's not a lot of material and a lot of space to absorb a lot of that sound. And then, of course, there's wind noise. Now, wind noise is generally okay up to about the national speed limit, but if you're the kind of person that drives beyond that, then you'll quite quickly realize that there is also another limit when it comes to the refinement available in this car. So, for example, if you're going to do a high-speed cruise over 4 or 5 hours, the Countryman will be perhaps slightly more tiring to sit in and to experience than, for example, a BMW iX1 in terms of wind noise and road noise. So that's something certainly worth bearing in mind if you're looking at one of these as your primary family hauler to do all of your various adventures in, etc. Because I do think that rolling refinement is something that is very important for family cars. However, at least once you are on the motorway, while the car might not be as quiet as you might like, you will appreciate the fact that at least these seats are very supportive, they're very comfortable, which means that doing miles in them and doing distance in them shouldn't be an issue at all. I appreciate the myriad of adjustability that you get in both the front seats for that matter, and the fact that there is also memory functionality for the driver. And so it does mean that when you're sharing this car with a spouse or a partner, for example, it's a lot easier to share your car. And then when you are driving longer distances, in addition to the slight change in refinement or the slight lack of refinement that you might want in a premium crossover, the other thing that's worth bearing in mind is the ride. Now, because this car, as I mentioned earlier, drives in such an agile manner, it's got a very lithe driving character to it, and so it does lend itself to a slightly sportier character, and of course that does come with a trade-off in terms of ride. So while the handling is great, the ride in this car is not so good. The primary ride is pretty good in the sense that it maintains body control very well, it manages its weight very well, and so this does feel like a car that you can chuck into corners with nary a concern. However, the secondary ride in this car is not so impressive, because even as I'm sat here on the Elite Highway, which is pretty well surfaced, even the smallest undulations in the road gets translated very immediately into the cabin. Now, on the one hand, that means that this car is very communicative, which means that, again, if you are driving this car intently, it does mean that as a driver, you're getting a lot of information being fed back to you from the car. However, when you're just trying to cover distance, I don't think that's going to be something that you'll enjoy very much. It might be fun for like the first hour, but then after that, your ass is going to hurt, and then that's not so fun anymore. Now, of course, I can hear many of you saying that ultimately this is a Mini, which means that it needs to drive like a Mini first, and I agree. And I think that anybody that walks into a Mini Countryman or begins the Countryman experience with the expectation of it being an overtly comfortable car has barked up the wrong tree. Because if you wanted isolation, if you wanted a car that really made you feel like you were completely separated from the road, then buy a Volvo XC40. That car feels like you walked into an isolation chamber. Whereas this is a lot more, for lack of a better word, involved. You feel like you're a lot more involved in the car, you feel like you're a lot more involved in the driving experience, and you feel like you're a lot more involved in terms of the car communicating things back to you. That creates, again, a driving characteristic that lends itself to a slightly more sporty edge, and I do think that the Countryman does hold up pretty well when you are driving it intently. But it's just that it doesn't have that duality in personality that you might want or that you might expect from a vehicle at this price point. However, the ride, to me, is not necessarily the most offensive part. I'll get to that a little bit later, because I will lead into that by talking about ADAS functionality. Now, the advanced driver assist features that are available on the Countryman are pretty alright. You've got blind spot monitoring, lane keep assist, a fantastic 360-degree camera, rear cross traffic alert, all the usual nonsense you expect in a car like this. However, I do think it's quite criminal that, again, for this price, we don't get adaptive cruise control. Now, I remember complaining about this in the Mini Cooper 3-door electric, and then getting into the Mini AIMAN and discovering that that car had adaptive cruise control, and now I'm back in the more expensive and slightly larger Countryman, and once again I've had adaptive cruise control taken away from me. I don't understand, it's not clear to me at the moment if it's a subscription that you have to pay for, or it's an option that you have to tick when you order the car, but I do feel that not offering ACC as standard at this price point does feel a bit nasty, because this is not an affordable car. It's not a cheap car by any measure, and given the fact that Mini buyers for the most part are urbanites, which means that they are going to be dealing with urban traffic most of the time, it just feels like adaptive cruise control with traffic jam assist should have been a no-brainer, and yet for some reason BMW Group Malaysia, and their Mini division at least, have decided that adaptive cruise control is not important for these customers. Now, the second issue that I'd like to bring up is this infotainment system. Now, once again, in the Mini Cooper, the little 3-door, this is fine, because that is a car that obviously you are buying with your heart over your head. If you're buying a 3-door $200,000 electric hatchback, it's quite clear that you're putting style over substance, and so having a slightly ridiculous infotainment system is fine, because you know what you've paid for. However, in a Countryman, this is meant to be a car that can do a little bit of everything. This is meant to be the Mini for the family, and so as a family buyer, you need certain practical, or you have certain practical expectations. So for example, the fact that this car has 2 cup holders in the front, 2 cup holders in the rear, that's great. That's what you want for a family car. The fact that it's got lots of cubby holes in the doors, they're quite large, and you've got cubby holes in the back of the seats, that's great. That is, again, what family buyers want. However, if you have a couple of children fussing in the back seat, it then makes it a bit difficult to then screw around with this screen, and it's pretty infuriating UX in order to get the right particular volume of Baby Shark in order to amuse your children. It feels like certain elements of this should have been refined for the application in the family Mini, instead of just taking what's available in the Cooper and the AIMAN and just chucking it in here wholesale. It just feels a little bit lazy, and the thing is, BMW used to do that in their different vehicles. So for example, the iDrive used to get in the 3 Series and the 5 Series used to be slightly different, and it also used to be slightly different when you got into the sports cars. However, it seems that now everyone just gets the exact same system across the board, which I'm sure saves them 20 euros a car or some ridiculous number like that, but it just creates a slightly less intuitive system for certain applications like this, and I just find that quite infuriating. Now, those two not quite so minor niggles aside, I do think that the Mini Countryman does fulfill the brief in being a Mini first, because this car does drive like a Mini, it responds like a Mini, it's got the agility of a Mini. And that's what you want when you're buying into this badge. However, I do also think that anyone who is stepping into a Mini for the first time and looking at the Countryman or considering the Countryman as their very first Mini, you do need to test drive these cars in order to better understand what the character is like, because again, this might not necessarily meet your expectations in terms of what a premium crossover is supposed to be. However, if you are walking into this with your eyes open, understanding what it means to drive a car carrying the Mini badge, then I think the Mini Countryman is exactly what you'd expect. It's not the most refined thing in the world because it doesn't matter. It's also not the most comfortable thing in the world because it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, this is meant to be a car that puts the driving experience first, and I do think the Mini Countryman still does that. Except it's just got a bit more space for people in the back, at least more than the AIMAN, and so it does make it a convincing, practical crossover in that regard. However, if you want a driving experience that is a little bit more isolating, then as I mentioned earlier, you might be better served in the Volvo XC40, which just like the Countryman is available with a turbocharged petrol engine or as an all-electric model, which means that again you get to enjoy a slightly more refined cabin, a little bit more comfort, and a car that is clearly dialed towards being a more traditional luxury car as opposed to the Mini experience. However, this is where I normally mention, if you're looking for the driver's choice, yeah, there's no other alternative. If you want the driver's choice in this segment, this is it. I do believe that the Mini Countryman is the best handling premium crossover within this sort of space, within this sort of size category, and I do think that if you're a keen driver, you will appreciate the way this car drives, because it is a very convincing driver's car. But the thing is, it's a driver's car the way Mini understands it. And I think that's the key takeaway from here. Understand the Mini point of view, and the Countryman is a fantastic little premium crossover. In any case, that concludes our review of the 2025 MINI Countryman S. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below, including the link to join our new WhatsApp channel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.